This is the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.
Have you ever seen a person siphon gasoline out of an automobile?
I haven't, but I have experienced it.
You haven't seen it, but you have experienced it? What do you mean?
Well, one day I've arrived at my car and found it empty. And in my car, you control the door to the gas pump from a button inside the car. And I guess someone had jacked it open.
Yeah, so supposedly there's technology in contemporary cars to make them, how should I say, unsiphonable. But I can remember seeing my father just stick a plastic hose into his car's gas tank and just siphon gas and just spit out gasoline. And at least I can say with confidence that it was unleaded and not leaded gasoline, given the timing of everything. But what a world people used to live in. All these CFCs and their spray paint. We used to have spray paint around my house. All of these magical chemicals that I'm sure are horrible and going to kill me. It's just, we used to just play around that stuff all the time. Now, I have my cell phone. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out stuff to talk about. Yeah. You ever been crabbing in a ditch?
No, I haven't.
Where is it? You've never been, have you ever been crabbing?
I have been crabbing off a dock.
What did you use when you went crabbing off a dock?
You use a little cage attached to a rope. You lower it into the water. Crabs come in. There you go.
Yeah. An old friend of mine, Derek, and I used to go crabbing out in who knows what's it, really east of New Orleans. And we would stop and pick up chicken, raw chicken, tie a string around a chicken leg and throw it in a ditch and just reel in these crabs and then put a net on them. It was just really rudimentary, but it was effective. Lovely stuff.
Speaking of what's effective, in our last episode on Federalist numbers 3, 4, 5, we began to speak as we turned to Fed 4 of effectual government, the term Publius uses in the final paragraph. And the term effectual or effectually turns up many times in the Federalist. You dared me to say that the term effectual government didn't make me think of a thinker who's very much concerned with an effectual thing in the 15th chapter of his little book. I thought we'd name our text and turn to chapter 15 of The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli, an infamous little book. Before we do that, Mike, who is Machiavelli? And especially given the reputation that attaches to this text, why should we dare read it?
Yeah, this is fun. I'm glad we're going to digress for a moment. Who was Machiavelli, you ask, Aaron? He was born in Florence in 1469 and he dies in Florence in 1527. He writes the book that we're going to discuss a little bit today, The Prince, in 1513. It's published posthumously after his death. Machiavelli participated in politics in Italy. He rose through the ranks. He was quite powerful, I would suggest. But as his politics was filled with tremendous amounts of motion, he fell out of favor when the Medici came back to power. When that happened, he was accused of being complicit in a conspiracy, imprisoned and tortured for a little while, and then released. And when he was released, he had lost all that he had acquired. Yet, he still knew a tremendous amount. A very, very intelligent man, a genius. And he still had everything that he acquired as far as his knowledge of men and political things. And he shares that knowledge with us in The Prince, and we would add some of his other writings, for instance, the Discourses on Livy, The Art of War, and so on and so forth. But we're here to talk about The Prince. Let me say one more word on why we should read him. It's often said that Machiavelli is an evil teacher of evil. I don't know if you've heard that. And some also argue that Machiavelli is the founder of modern political thought. This would then suggest that modern thought is evil. This is one reason why we should read Machiavelli. If we are moderns, which we are, if our understanding of politics tends towards what's called political realism, if Machiavelli is the founder of how we moderns think about God, nature, science, politics, the people who came before us, the people who are around us, and the people who will come after us, then we ought to study his works with care. Studying Machiavelli stands to reveal to us the quality of the modern world, to reveal to us whether it's good or evil, high or low, the product of a man of great humanity or great malevolence. And inasmuch as we are beneficiaries of his political and moral thought, studying Machiavelli stands to reveal ourselves to us. Therefore, we should read Machiavelli because we're vain. We want to look in the mirror. Machiavelli should help us think through a way of understanding the world that we perhaps take for granted. For although the word Machiavellian is thrown around to describe people and their actions, are we certain that we understand this word or that we use it correctly? Are we certain that what we now consider good and what was formerly considered evil is truly good? Are we certain that we ought to order ourselves by what human beings do instead of what human beings ought to do? It's at least for these reasons I think that we ought to study Machiavelli, and it's why you and I are now going to turn to Machiavelli's Prince, chapter 15.
Thank you. Let us really end a discussion of chapter 15 with this question: do we do what we do or what we should do? Where to take our bearings? Chapter 15 sits about near the middle of the Prince. The Prince begins with a dedicatory letter to Lorenzo the Magnificent, and it ends after 26 chapters. It's short. That's the first thing worth noting about chapter 15. It is about 500 words. It's hard to imagine how a writer could fit so much in them. And it comes at a moment clearly of transition in The Prince. We're reading from Harvey Mansfield's translation from the University of Chicago Press. The chapter is titled "Of Those Things for Which Men, and Especially Princes, Are Praised or Blamed." And he says, "It remains now to see what the modes and government of a prince should be with subjects and with friends." That's what remains in the discussion. So we've clearly just completed something. Now we're moving forward. And we're talking about praise and blame, not only for princes. Remember, the title of this book is The Prince, but men generally. So there's a lesson here, not only about men who are in power, that is, princes, but also a lesson maybe for all of us, whether we are in our normal interactions with each other or in political society more particularly. Machiavelli tells us that he's afraid of being presumptuous. And because I know that many have written of this, I fear that in writing of it again, I may be held presumptuous, especially since in disputing this matter, I depart from the orders of others. So he makes a reference to this older political tradition, Mike, that you mentioned. He tells us that he departs from the orders of others. He is going to do something new. And if you've read the preface and the dedicatory letter to the Discourses on Livy, you would see that he thinks that he is discovering a new continent. He compares himself to the Italian explorer who had recently discovered a new continent, Christopher Columbus. He is charting new territory. So we can see he's clearly making a break from the past. And here we're going to make our firm connection to the Federalist. But since my intent, he says, is to write something useful to whoever understands it, it has appeared to me more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of the thing than to the imagination of it.
It's interesting, the critiques that are here. These sentences don't seem that sharp. There's work to be done. Plenty of other people have been here before, but Machiavelli is here to depart from the orders of others. The systems they've built might be language you and I would use today. The way that they think about the world, the laws that govern their world. Look at this critique. He wants to write something useful. Well, implicit, therefore, is that the other writers from whom he departs have not written something useful. They've written something what? Neutral or useless. And we have to wonder now. Certainly we think what's good is what's useful, or useful is what's good. But is the good exhausted in the useful? Already a fun question that's very important. What is going to be useful for us? Going to the effectual truth of the thing rather than the imagination of it. Publius, we can say, has spoken of visionaries and will speak of visionaries in the Federalist. He too critiques people who imagine things. who conjure things up, phantasms. This now is realism. This is how things actually are. The truth of things, to be sure, is not language peculiar to Machiavelli. Some of our favorite and most important thinkers speak of the truth all the time. They pursue truth. What's different here is the effectual truth, right? The effectual truth. What works? And I want to suggest very quickly, just from the little bit we've read here, what works is deemed as working, as effectual, by way of its usefulness. So you and I now have to also wonder, here's another question, useful for what? Useful in what way? Useful how? Who's finding it useful? All these questions come rushing in.
So we're drawing a line between the effectual truth and the truth. What are the sources of these different truths? And it's funny, we talk a lot.
What do you mean by drawing a line? What are you thinking when you say drawing a line?
Well, Machiavelli, in putting the adjective effectual on truth, wants us to think that there is truth, and maybe previous writers have been confused as to truth, but that he's concerned with effectual truth. Should we understand that the previous writers mistook the truth for something else?
Yeah, that's right. So we have to think about truth differently. And that's what I was getting at. Plenty of other people have talked about the truth. And let's see if what he says next helps us understand this matter more clearly. I see what you mean now, Aaron. So he has to speak about this thing with which we're familiar, truth, differently, because the truth with which we are familiar, I can assume, is not useful.
Let me just quickly ask you, how would you read the sentence differently if effectual were not in it?
Well, for us, with our value-free world, wherein there is a distinction between fact and value, we could drop the word effectual. For us in the 21st century, we don't need the word effectual because we don't think that there's such a thing as moral truth. Or maybe we do. Maybe you and I do. And maybe our listeners do. But you at least understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. We today would just say, no, the truth is speed is measured by distance divided by time, or the average weight of a human heart is 10.5 ounces or something like this. Or one that Publius certainly cared about, to move an object, a force that is greater than the forces opposing that object's motion is needed. Oh, and you can measure that. Force equals mass times acceleration, and so on and so on. Versus you suggesting that, and let me just be crazy here, murder is evil, slavery is evil, there's such a thing as justice that exists independently of human will. Well, we relativists and historicists today would declare that there's no such truth in any of the things you say, Aaron, because those moral judgments are just accidental historical developments, products of your culture and time. So that's us today. But imagine if we were reading this any time prior to, when do you want me to say? The 18th century? Sure. Effectual really adds something. And again, the sequel is going to help us understand this more clearly, because effectual truth is now going to be set against the imagination of a thing. And many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth. For it is so far from how one lives to how one should live, that he who lets go of what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. A lot in that sentence. So we're worried about effectual truth versus the imagination of a thing in terms of politics foremost. And these two types of what we would call regimes, republic and principality, are the two types that Machiavelli sets out in the first chapter of the book. And he says, oh, I'm only going to talk about principalities because I talk about republics somewhere else. And then, of course, he's talking about republics almost instantly. But these are the two types. One alone in a principality or a republic where the people participate in lawmaking and governance to some extent or another. And Machiavelli also shows us that these are sort of malleable, liquid concepts. And he's not thinking about them as Aristotle does in terms of whether or not one is good and one is bad. One is for the common good. One is for the good of the rulers. He doesn't think about it that way. that aside, I hope that digression doesn't get in the way of the overall point here. Namely, we are concerned with the effectual truth of politics in terms of these structures. And now we have to wonder, who's imagining republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth? And then once we answer that question, I'm going to ask you a second question. How could we possibly order our lives around make-believe, around imagination, around something that's not real? So do you have an answer, or do you want me to answer?
I think I do. I hear imagined republics, and I think of, first of all, the Republic of Plato, the city and speech that Socrates describes for much of that dialogue. I think of Aristotle's ideal regime, which he says has to come about through combinations of fortune. When I hear imagined principalities, the first thing I think of is the city of God, Augustine, and then I get a little more nervous and I think of the kingdom of heaven.
So now you can see how radical this is. And thanks for saying it. You kept me from having to say it. So now you can see how radical this is. You're living your whole life and you're orienting your entire life around something that's not real versus what's real. And what's real now is demonstrable good by way of its utility, its usefulness. Look at what comes after the little bit of the sentence that you and I just unpacked. After the semicolon, I'll reread it. For it is so far from how one lives to how one should live that he who lets go of what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. That puts meat on the bones of useful, of why effectual truth is preferable to imagined truth, I guess, if I can say that. Namely, preservation versus ruin. What's useless is that which ruins you. What's useful is that which preserves you. Now, that's only based off of what we have right here. It's not exhausting all that Machiavelli is going to say. We're just working through the paragraph. So why would you bother following any of these imagined republics or principalities, their lessons, their morality, their politics? It's going to kill you.
We should make very explicit, Machiavelli is attacking the ancients. He's also attacking the Christians. We think in terms of the ancients, we might think of a good life, a happy life, a life pursuing virtue. Well, Machiavelli says a good life here is a life that is preserved. But when we think of a Christian life, we might think that one should sacrifice himself for his friends. Think that there is salvation in the next life, that we should order our own lives to possibly suffer, possibly die for it. Machiavelli thinks that's nonsense. The one way I've been taught this image is to think of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Well, Good Shepherd wouldn't let his flock get killed, but that's exactly what Machiavelli says that the previous writers do. That is his attack on Christianity, that the poor sheep are totally threatened by the wolves of the world who don't do what they should do. And that should do, of course, is tongue in cheek. He's thinking about some higher normative standard than simply the one that governs us. If we look to, for example, what previous princes have done, or we look to what our most rapacious neighbor has done.
That's right. That's right. And so we have this problem in terms of the individual princes, conceivably even the individual citizens, to say nothing of Florence, of Milan, etc. So it goes all the way up to the regime itself.
Yeah, we might point out, I mentioned that the prince is prefaced with a dedicatory letter to Lorenzo the Magnificent, to one man. But what does he say when what we've already read? This book is intended for whoever understands it. So it's something that's useful for all of us. We shouldn't think of it as time-bound or as limited to the circumstances or as limited to the man to whom it is, at least on the surface, intended.
Let's read the last bit of this first paragraph of Prince 15 and then maybe even talk about the Federalist Papers a little bit.
For a man who wants to make a profession of good in all regards must come to ruin among so many who are not good. Hence it is necessary to a prince, if he wants to maintain himself, to learn to be able not to be good, and to use this and not use it according to necessity.
This sentence is such a blast, students will misread it. This bit, to learn to be able not to be good. It's such a funny thought for us. We have to unlearn harmful behavior. That harmful behavior is what we call good, according to our imagined truth, according to our oughts and our shoulds. In comparison with the effectual truth of things, knowledge of which is useful and shall bring about our preservation or secure it. Now look at this sentence. If you're going to be good in all regards, by which he means good in the reigning moral sense of his Christian Italy, as influenced by, in no small part by Plato, for sure. If you're going to make a profession of, scare quotes, good in all regards, you're done. You're going to meet your ruin. Why? Because all you have to do is look around you and see that people aren't good. This is an understanding of human beings. Why are you sitting around here acting saintly around so many sinners? Yeah, because I want to go to heaven. Well, as you've allowed us to do, Aaron, there's really calling into question the viability of that notion. What matters most is this world, preservation here and now for Machiavelli. It's grounded in this way. Now, we'll see in other parts of the Prince that he understands that human beings are spiritual and the necessity of being, what's the favorite turn of phrase, an armed prophet. The power of religion is undeniable. But don't get high on your own supply is the lesson. I apologize for being vulgar, but it's Machiavelli. So here, look at this line. Hence, it is necessary to a prince. There's something guiding you here. Necessity. And you and I have seen necessity so much in the Federalist Papers. It is necessary to a prince if he wants to maintain himself. I want to maintain myself. I don't want to die, let alone lose my kingdom and then die. It is necessary to a prince if he wants to maintain himself to learn to be able not to be good and to use this and not use this according to necessity. So necessity, the things you encounter in the world. Now it feels like we're talking about prudence, as Aristotle might have me think about it. We're going to see something like this on the next page of Prince 15. That's not Aristotelian prudence. But all the same, as challenges arise, as the world turns, as you encounter men, as there is feast, as there is famine, you must alter your behavior. Instead of, young Aaron, always do the right thing. Always be kind and generous and love your fellow human beings, no matter what, Aaron. Instead of that, let necessity and your judgment reveal the answer to you. Be good in this moment or be not good in this moment. Hey, how easy is that going to be for you? How easy is that to do? Like, how radical a prescription is this in yet another way? Not merely in its impious proclamations, but in terms of what kind of person is this who picks up and puts down morality in a judicious manner according to necessity? You have to learn this behavior, he says. Can you imagine? Notice at the beginning of paragraph 2, Machiavelli does not offer any qualifier on truth. He moves from imagined to true at the beginning of paragraph 2. We already are what? Initiated, if we're paying attention into thinking this way. Now, the effectual truth of things is what is true, beginning of paragraph 2.
You just made a reference to Aristotle. We have to consider why this is different from Aristotle's conception of prudence. And rather than continue to read the whole of chapter 15, I just want to give a list of pairings of virtues and vices that Machiavelli offers us to really point out how the conception of virtù that Machiavelli is using is different from that of the ethics. And as we're listening, we should really consider what's the vice and what's the virtue, if we're using this Aristotelian language. Someone is considered liberal, someone mean, someone is considered a giver, someone rapacious, someone cruel, someone merciful, the one a breaker of faith, the other faithful, the one effeminate and pusillanimous, the other fierce and spirited, the one humane, the other proud, the one lascivious, the other chaste, the one honest, the other astute, the one hard, the other agreeable, the one grave, the other light, the one religious, the other unbelieving, and the like. He continues, and I know that everyone will confess that it would be a very praiseworthy thing to find in a prince all of the above-mentioned qualities that are held good, but because he cannot have them, nor wholly observe them, since human conditions do not permit it, it is necessary for him to be so prudent as to know how to avoid the infamy of those vices that would take his state from him, and to be on guard against those that do not, if that is possible.
There's the word prudence. And now we have some understanding of Machiavellian prudence. Prudence might be the virtue. If I understand correctly, that Machiavellian prudence is using your toolbox well. In this situation, it would be knowing when to be a breaker of faith and when to keep the faith, to say nothing of that wonderful chapter on in what mode a prince ought to keep the faith. But it's actually being able to, what's the word we would use today? Pivot in terms of your morality according to necessity. And that sort of understanding of the world and of men and of how to behave in that situation is what's virtue. It's why you should care about the effectual truth of things. Because then once you understand the effectual truth of things, how things really are, then you can have some bigger sense of necessity, and then you can behave accordingly to the end of maintaining yourself. Now, it's a little deeper than just maintaining yourself, and I'll at least admit it. For me personally, this is the way I read it, and different people will read Machiavelli differently, but there's a statement back there in chapter 3, wherein Machiavelli declares it as a perfectly natural and ordinary thing to desire to acquire. Machiavelli does not blame the desire to acquire as others do. Instead, it's just who human beings are. We all want to acquire. Well, maybe some people want to be left alone, but who we're worried about are the people who want to acquire. Machiavelli says there, speaking of praise and blame, as he does here in chapter 15, there's nothing wrong, my words now, there's nothing wrong with the desiring to acquire. The problem is when you try to acquire and you lose. Here lies the error and blame. And when those attempt to acquire succeed, they are not blamed, and sometimes they're even praised. This is the effectual truth of acquiring. Here's the easy way to say it. Everybody likes a winner. Is Machiavelli trying to say everybody likes a winner no matter how the winner wins? By hook or crook, you still like a winner? Okay, maybe that's too much. You're at least not going to blame them, even if they cheated. And you have to sit back and say, well, man, we don't like cheaters. Like we find out people, are on testosterone or steroids or whatevs when they shouldn't be, and they win certain bicycle races that are a big deal. These people are defamed. So that's still a way in which, of course, we are moral. Notice this might be where you and I disagree, Aaron. Machiavelli's advice is for princes. It'd be really hard for us, for hoi polloi, to live according to this. We need our bromides. I need my imagined republic. And why don't you, Aaron, understanding that I need my imagined republic, give it to me in order to acquire me as your citizen or subject who is obliged to you through thick and thin.
And why he says a prince should be all religion. It is one of the most important qualities for him to have. And notice, we're not avoiding the vices, right? We all want a winner, but there's a way he says that princes can avoid the infamy of vices. And this, if we were going to continue reading, we would see where deception, where having the appearance of a thing is more important than having the thing itself, especially of the ordinary people, what he calls the vulgar, you and me, consider virtue, stuck to our Christian, to our ancient moralities.
We love winners, though, and we want security and safety, and we fear things by all means. Notice how he ends 15. And furthermore, one should not care about incurring the fame of those vices without which it is difficult to save one's state. So it's okay for you to be a killer, as long as you're our killer. And he continues, for if one considers everything well, one will find something appears to be virtue, which if pursued would be one's ruin, and something else appears to be vice, which if pursued results in one's security and well-being. So the horizon of Prince 15 is what's useful, preservation, and then security and well-being. So much of the horizon of those single-digit Federalist Papers you and I have been studying. And it's where you start. Now, is that the whole horizon of human being? Is there something grander for us with which we should be occupied? Now, Machiavelli is going to talk about well-being. He is going to talk about how much we want things. And he will, even in a very interesting way. In what is it? In Prince chapter 8, he's going to speak of glory as an acquisition. It's somewhat difficult to understand exactly what's going on there. But we know even Machiavelli himself has acquired something by writing this book. He's acquired us. We're sitting here reading it. Machiavelli will discuss writers throughout this book and how important writers are and how it is that they can understand things correctly or misunderstand things and misrelay them. For instance, I'm thinking of Hannibal and his portrayal of that. But writers. Machiavelli's a writer. He's a teacher. Machiavelli will also speak of founders throughout this book, most famously in chapter 6. Well, isn't Machiavelli himself a founder? Founder of modernity, I've argued. Maybe we're all Machiavellian in some way or another. Aren't our founding fathers also writers? They founded us through their writings, ranging from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution and Federalist Papers, to say nothing of all of their personal papers and acts as statesmen. It's worth thinking about how much we are because of them. And when we do, we must admit the importance of security and all of the institutions that the Founding Fathers constructed in an effort to lend security to the American people. But we should also look to the education that they offer to maintenance these institutions, sure, but also to try and fill out the horizon of human being. Because I've used this language a few times in this conversation. This is the horizon, I said, regarding Prince 15. Well, is the whole of the horizon of human being exhausted in the need for security? Certainly not. The Federalist Papers shows that the horizon of human beings is greater than mere security. Publius is going to show us the virtues and habits becoming self-governing human being. And that's going to be an exciting part of continuing to read the Federalist Papers.
This has been the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.